20 years ago, I was taught something by an Aboriginal elder that changed my life forever. She taught me a unique science of prayer that I'd never heard before. And I was at university and I was asked to develop a new course on spirituality and social transformation, which I ended up teaching for 17 years. But at first, I had no idea how to develop it and really didn't know how to teach that kind of subject. And so I went to this elder who was a student in another course. She was about 60, she's in her 60s at the time. And I asked her, Auntie, I said, do you have any advice on how I should develop this course? And she said, yeah. If they have any challenges, anything that's burdening them, any solutions that they need in their life, to ask them to go find a beautiful place in nature, a beautiful tree or a river, somewhere that evokes a sense of beauty for them. And they should sit there and ask, turn to God or their soul or spiritual reality, however they perceive that, something other than themselves, the good, and to ask for help. Very simple. But they should then trust that there's going to be an answer at some point. It might not come right away, but there will be an answer. And that when that answer does come, they should act on that and observe what occurs and then repeat that process. So it's quite a simple method, but I thought to myself, well, I can't really teach students this unless I try this for myself. So I did. I went outside and I found a beautiful spot and I sat down and I said, I don't even know what to ask. I'd like to be of service somehow, do something good for somebody else that I can't even think about because I really just couldn't think of anything to ask for. But I did. I trusted, okay, I'll trust there's some kind of answer that's going to come. Now, the next day, I'm walking down the hallway in the university and I was going to one of my supervisors to ask him a question. And there's a woman in the hallway who's talking to him. I can see they're already engaged in conversation, but I was looking at a piece of paper and I got too close to them before I realized they were talking, and she was crying, telling an emotional story. And I was about to turn away and go, but she made eye contact. And so, I was kind of, respect the space, and she's kind of inviting with her eyes for me to stay present and listen to the story. And she said, there's this beautiful book that I've read called Wisdom Man about the life of Aboriginal elder Banjo Clark. And she was talking about, how he lived his life of compassion for everyone and humility and service. And, she had just been asked to present the award to the author for Unsung Indigenous Hero Award for having written this book. She sat with this elder for 20 years and then donated all the profits to the family without, taking any credit for herself, or financial gain, I should say. And so later I read this book and I got a copy of it almost right away. And I read this book and I found out it was incredible. It was like when I was a child in the States, I remember watching a TV series called Roots, which is, it's an intergenerational story about the history of slavery and the experience of one family through the generations from slavery to liberation. Well, this is a very similar story following the generations of this Aboriginal family from a queen in Tasmania through to, the current generation, and all the sacrifices and humility and forgiveness for the things that they experienced during the kind of settlement period of Australia and onwards, but this constant forgiveness. It was very powerful. And so I thought, this book should be turned into a movie. I'd like to see it like Roots on TV in Australia. And so I went over to this woman who had presented the award and I asked her, I said, I'd love to help with making this into a movie, anything, making coffee, doing whatever, And she said, she kind of laughed, like, who are you to, I'm sure the rights for this best-selling book have already been sold. But she ended up turning and saying, okay, because I must have looked a little bit sad. And she said, here, I'll give you the email address of the author. So I emailed the author and said, look, I'd love to help in any way if you need anything, to help with making this movie, if this book hasn't been turned into one yet. And she wrote back straight away with her phone number. And she said, been waiting for you to call. And I was like, okay. So I called her and she said, Banjo said you were the one we were waiting for. And I'm like, how do you deal with that kind of comment? Like, seriously, it's not something that's not my thing, And first of all, I don't really know anything about making movies. And I thought Banjo had passed away a couple of years before at least. So how is she saying that to me? And so anyway, but then I remembered I'd said that prayer the day before, asking to be of service. So all I said was, what do you need? And she said, well, before Banjo passed away, he asked for a very famous director to take care of making this film. His name's um, Phil Noyce, and he made Rabbit Proof Fence, and he made Man on Fire with Denzel Washington, and he's a very famous director. But you can get him to be the director. And I said, oh, how am I going to do that? And she said, well, you live in Sydney and he lives in Sydney. You can just go give him the book and he'll make the movie. And I was like, how on earth can I do that? So she said, well, I've got his address. I Googled him. And she said he works at the this film studio in Sydney. You can go visit him there. Fox Studios, which is like an entertainment center as well. So I ended up the next morning getting ready to go. I say, okay, I'm going to trust this. It's my birthday. I'm going to go do this. And my son was very young at the time, getting him ready for school. And he goes, Dad, I'm sick. I don't want to go. And so at first I'm like, okay, I'm going to let him come and, not scold him for pretending to be sick. And he'll just come with me. And so we went. And when we went, he broke free of my hand. And I was asking lots of people, do you know where Phil Noyce's office is? Nobody knew. My son broke free of my hand, went into this children's clothing store because it had lots of colorful letters and stuff. The woman inside ends up she's really pregnant. And she asked me, do you need any help? And I said, well, I'm looking for Phil Noyce. And she's like, why do you want to know where Phil Noyce's office is? And I'm like, why are you doing this? And she turns out she just finished her master's. She started crying when I told her the story about Banjo Clark. And she said that the reason she was crying was because she just finished her master's in comparing Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal biographies in film. She's a scriptwriter. And I said, well, you must be the scriptwriter. And I'm sure the author would be happy for you to adapt it for film. And so I give her the copy of the book and get another one. And she tells me where Phil Noyce's office is. And he happens to be in South Africa filming a different movie. But I go home. I figure out maybe I was just supposed to give the book to her. And she ends up texting me the next day. And she says, well, actually a few days later. And she says, I've had my baby. The agency sent over the doula or the nurse to help me take care of the baby. And the doula is the next door neighbor to Phil Noyce. I'll give her the book and she'll give it to Phil Noyce. So yeah, there's a lot more to that story. I've only got 1 minute left because this only gives me a 10-minute option. So, comment if you want a part 2 on that story. But just thought I would share that. And that kind of set of relationships being activated, I don't know how it works, but those steps of prayer that auntie taught me were super amazing. And it seems to work every time that you sit with intent and trust, and then action's the key part. It happens. And so yeah, I just wanted to share that with you. But yeah, let me know if you want a part 2 on that, and feel free to ask questions, like, have a discussion, and follow if you like to hear more about that kind of thing. Alrighty, thank you.